The chlorine stung my eyes, but I didn't care. I had to see. Just a little closer. He was down there, my stepson Michael. His back was to me, glistening wet in the afternoon sun. The pool shimmered, distorting the image, but I could make out the rhythmic motion of his hand. Up and down. Up and down. My breath hitched in my throat. Was he? No. It couldn't be. He was just adjusting his swimsuit. Yes, that's it. Just adjusting. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the serene backdrop of our backyard. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken questions. I should turn away. I knew I should, but my feet were rooted to the spot, a morbid curiosity holding me captive. The sun beat down on my neck, a burning accusation. What was I doing? What was I about to see? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, painting the pristine white of our house in hues of gold and rose. A gentle breeze rustled the palm fronds, their whisper a soothing counterpoint to the rhythmic splash of the pool. Everything looked perfect. Picture perfect, really. The kind of image you'd see on a postcard, captioned with words like serenity and bliss. But beneath the surface of this idyllic scene, a disquiet hummed, a low thrum of unease that had been growing steadily within me for weeks. I watched Michael from the kitchen window. He was sprawled on a lounge chair by the pool, his long, lean frame stretched out in the sun. He was 16, all sharp angles and brooding silence, a constant reminder of the life David had before me, a life I only knew in fragmented stories and faded photographs. He had his headphones on, his eyes closed, lost in his own world. Or so it seemed. There was something about the stillness of his pose, the almost unnatural relaxation of his body, that made me uneasy. It was as if he was listening to something beyond the music playing in his ears. David would be home soon. He was working late again, a common occurrence these days. His dedication to his work was admirable, I knew, but sometimes I felt like he prioritized it over everything else. Over me. Over Michael. The thought brought a familiar pang of loneliness, a feeling I'd become accustomed to over the past few years. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Chicken, David's favorite. I chopped vegetables with a little more force than necessary, the sharp click of the knife against the cutting board a release for my pent-up frustration. The aroma of garlic and herbs filled the air, a comforting scent that usually calmed me. But tonight, it did little to soothe my nerves. There was a tension in the house, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that I couldn't quite explain. It was as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I'd felt it all day, this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, this sense of being watched. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing hour. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 6 o'clock. David should be home any minute. I hoped he wasn't too late. I needed to talk to him. About Michael. About the things I'd been noticing. The things that were making me so uneasy. But I knew, even as I thought the words, that he would dismiss my concerns. He always did. "You're just imagining things, Sarah," he'd say, his voice patient, yet condescending. "Michael's just a teenager. He's going through changes." But it wasn't just teenage angst. It was something more, something darker. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I could feel it, a cold knot of fear tightening in my stomach. It was the way Michael looked at me sometimes, his eyes lingering a little too long, his gaze too intense. It was the way he moved, so fluid and graceful, almost predatory. And it was the silence, the heavy, suffocating silence that filled the house when we were alone. I heard a car pull into the driveway. David was home. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. I needed to be calm, rational. I couldn't let my fear overwhelm me. But as I walked towards the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something irrevocable. And I was afraid of what it would be. The water lapped against the tiles, a gentle counterpoint to the turmoil brewing inside me. I retreated slightly, hiding behind the bougainvillea, its vibrant fuchsia blooms a stark contrast to the gray cloud of unease settling over me. Michael. He was just 16. A good kid, mostly. Quiet. Kept to himself. I tried, God knows I tried, to build a relationship with him, but it was like trying to connect with a ghost. His father, David, my husband, had warned me. "He's still adjusting," he'd said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Give him time." But it had been 3 years. 3 years of awkward silences, forced smiles, and the constant feeling of walking on eggshells. I remember the first time I'd seen him. He'd been 13, all gangly limbs and brooding eyes, the image of his mother, whom David rarely spoke of. There was a sadness about him, a quiet desperation that tugged at my heartstrings. I'd wanted to be a mother to him, to fill the void left by his own. But he'd always kept me at arm's length, his gaze guarded, his responses clipped. The memory of David's words echoed in my ears. He's still adjusting. Adjusting to what? To me. To his father's new life? Or something more sinister? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I pushed it away, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Just a worried stepmother, overreacting. But the image of Michael by the pool kept flashing in my mind. The rhythmic motion, the glistening skin, the way the sunlight caught the water droplets on his back, making him seem almost ethereal. I felt a strange pull towards him, a mixture of curiosity and something darker, something I couldn't quite name. Later that evening, dinner was a strained affair. David rambled on about his day at the office, oblivious to the tension radiating from me. Michael sat across from me, his eyes downcast, picking at his food. He barely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a low murmur. "How was your day, Michael?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out a little too high-pitched. He shrugged. "Fine. Did you go for a swim?" I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. He nodded curtly. "The water looked nice and cool," I said, my gaze fixed on his face, searching for any flicker of emotion. He didn't respond. He just continued to eat, his expression unreadable. David glanced up from his plate. "Leave him alone, Sarah," he said, his voice sharp. "He's not in the mood for conversation." I bit back a retort, my frustration bubbling to the surface. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I knew it would be futile. David would just dismiss me, and Michael would retreat further into his shell. After dinner, I went to the kitchen to clean up. David went to his study to work, and Michael disappeared upstairs. I could hear the muffled sound of his music through the floorboards, a heavy, pulsating beat that seemed to vibrate through the entire house. I stood by the sink, staring out the window at the darkened pool. The water shimmered under the moonlight, its surface as smooth and impenetrable as Michael's gaze. I felt a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Something was wrong. I knew it, and I had a feeling it had something to do with Michael. I couldn't shake the image of him by the pool, the rhythmic motion of his hand. Was I imagining things? Was I letting my imagination run wild? Or was there something more to it? I decided to go for a walk. I needed some air, some time to think. I slipped on my sandals and headed out the back door, the cool night air a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside the house. The pool was deserted, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. I walked over to the edge and looked down into the water. It was still and silent, reflecting the starry sky like a mirror. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But the image of Michael kept intruding, his face a mask of indifference, his actions shrouded in mystery. I opened my eyes and looked around, as if searching for some clue, some explanation. And then I saw it, a small, white towel lying on one of the lounge chairs. It looked like Michael's. I walked over and picked it up. It was damp, and it smelled faintly of chlorine and something else. Something musky, almost animalistic. My heart pounded in my chest. I held the towel to my nose, inhaling deeply. The scent was faint, but it was there, and it sent a shiver of fear down my spine. What was that smell? What was Michael doing by the pool? And why did I feel so afraid? The scent on the towel, that strange mix of chlorine and something else, clung to my nostrils, a persistent reminder of my unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of uncovering something unsettling, something that would shatter the fragile peace of our home. I walked back to the house, my footsteps echoing on the deserted patio. Inside, the silence was deafening. David was still in his study, the soft glow of his desk lamp visible through the window. Michael's music had stopped, leaving an unnerving quiet in its wake. I went upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated outside Michael's door, listening for any sound from within. Nothing. Just the stillness of the night. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly. Should I? Was I crossing a line? But the image of the towel, the scent, the rhythmic motion by the pool, it was all swirling in my mind, fueling my anxiety. I pushed the door open slowly, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the window. I stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The air was thick, heavy with a strange mix of teenage boy and something else. Something familiar, yet unsettling. The same scent I detected on the towel. I moved cautiously through the room, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. His bed was unmade, clothes strewn across the floor. A half-eaten bag of chips lay on his desk, next to an open textbook. He was a creature of habit, I knew. Always studying, always striving. Yet, there was something about the room tonight, an unsettling disorder that spoke of a deeper unrest. I noticed a small, wooden box on his nightstand. It was intricately carved, the lid slightly ajar. Curiosity gnawed at me. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. I reached for the box, my fingers brushing against the smooth wood. I lifted the lid slowly, careful not to make a sound. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of things. Small, personal items. A worn leather bracelet. A smooth gray stone. A photograph. I picked up the photograph, my heart skipping a beat. It was Michael, younger, maybe 10 or 11, standing with a woman. His mother? She was smiling, her arm around him. He looked happy. Truly happy. A stark contrast to the guarded, sullen boy I knew. I felt a pang of guilt, a wave of sadness washing over me. He missed her. Of course he did. And I, in my clumsy attempts to be a mother figure, had only pushed him further away. I put the photograph back in the box, my hand lingering for a moment. I closed the lid gently, a sense of unease settling over me. I was intruding. I knew I was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. On the floor, tucked under his bed, was a small black notebook. I hesitated. Should I? No. I knew I shouldn't, but the pull was too strong to resist. I reached for the notebook, my fingers brushing against the rough cover. It was filled with writing, small, cramped letters that filled the pages. I flipped through it, my eyes scanning the words. They were fragmented, disjointed thoughts, snippets of conversations, dreams, and something else. Something that made my blood run cold. He wrote about the pool, about the water, the way it felt against his skin. He wrote about the sun, the way it warmed him. And he wrote about me. He described me in detail, my hair, my eyes, my smile. He wrote about watching me, about wanting. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I slammed the notebook shut, my hands shaking. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there. I had to get away. I backed out of the room, my eyes wide with fear. I closed the door softly behind me, my hand still trembling on the doorknob. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. What had I just read? What was happening? I walked back to my room, my mind reeling. I couldn't shake the image of the words in the notebook, the way he had described me, the things he had wanted. I felt violated, exposed. And I felt a deep, gnawing fear. A fear of my stepson. A fear of what he was thinking. A fear of what he might do. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the evening in my head. The towel, the scent, the notebook. It was all connected, I knew it. But how? What did it all mean? I thought about David, sleeping soundly in the next room, oblivious to the turmoil raging inside me. Should I tell him? Could I? What would he say? Would he believe me? Or would he dismiss me, as he always did, telling me I was overreacting? I didn't know what to do. I was trapped, caught in a web of fear and uncertainty. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, to forget. But the words in the notebook kept flashing in my mind, haunting me, whispering in the darkness. And I knew with a chilling certainty that my life would never be the same. Sleep offered no respite. The words in Michael's notebook were etched into my mind, burning like a brand. Each time I drifted off, they resurfaced, twisting and morphing into grotesque shapes. I saw his eyes in the darkness, no longer sullen and withdrawn, but sharp, knowing. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs, the silence of the room amplifying my fear. Morning arrived, pale and unwelcome. The house felt different, charged with an unspoken tension. I moved through the motions of preparing breakfast, my hands clumsy, my thoughts scattered. David came into the kitchen, his usual cheerful self, completely unaware of the turmoil within me. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, kissing me lightly on the cheek. "You look a little pale. Didn't sleep well." I forced a smile. "Just a bad dream," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. Michael came downstairs, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. There was something different about his look, a hint of knowing, or was it just my imagination? He didn't say a word, just grabbed a piece of toast and left. The day stretched out before me, long and agonizing. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My mind kept drifting back to the notebook, to the words, to the fear that gnawed at me. I felt like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. David went to work, leaving me alone in the house with Michael. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. I kept expecting Michael to appear, to confront me. To what? I didn't even know. I just knew that I couldn't bear to be in the same house with him, not after what I had read. I tried to stay busy, cleaning, gardening, anything to keep my mind occupied. But it was no use. The fear was always there, lurking in the shadows, whispering in my ear. The afternoon dragged on, each minute an eternity. I found myself watching the clock, waiting for David to come home. I needed to talk to him, to tell him what I had found. But a part of me was afraid of his reaction, afraid of what he might say. Finally, the time came for David to return. I heard his car pull into the driveway, and my heart leaped with a mixture of relief and dread. I waited for him in the living room, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. He came in, his face tired but smiling. "Hi, honey," he said, kissing me. "How was your day?" "Fine," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his smile fading. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, my words catching in my throat. How could I tell him? How could I explain the fear that was consuming me? I need to talk to you," I finally said, my voice trembling. He sat down next to me, his expression concerned. "What is it, Sarah?" I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. "It's about Michael," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed. "What has he done now?" It's not what he's done," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's what I found." I told him about the notebook, about the things Michael had written. I told him about the fear that had gripped me, the feeling of being watched, of being violated. He listened in silence, his face growing increasingly pale. When I finished, he sat there for a moment, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm sure." He stood up, his face a mask of anger. "I'll talk to him," he said, his voice tight. He went upstairs, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. I sat there, waiting, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear his voice, muffled, angry, and then Michael's voice, low, defiant. The argument went on for what seemed like an eternity. I could hear the anger in their voices, the tension in the air. And then, suddenly, silence. David came back downstairs, his face grim. "I've talked to him," he said, his voice flat. "And?" I asked, my voice trembling. He shook his head. "He denies everything." "But the notebook," I said, my voice rising in panic. "He says it's just teenage fantasies," David said, his voice laced with disbelief. "He says I'm overreacting." I stared at him, my mind reeling. He didn't believe me. He didn't believe his own son was capable of such things. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. He shrugged. "I don't know," he said, his voice tired. I don't know." He walked away, leaving me alone in the living room, my fear growing stronger than ever. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning, that the nightmare was far from over. The house settled into an uneasy quiet, a fragile truce masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. David retreated to his study, the click of his keyboard a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. Michael remained upstairs, a silent presence I could feel, a constant reminder of the fear that gripped me. I wandered through the house, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. The familiar surroundings seemed to mock me, their normalcy a stark contrast to the chaos within me. I felt like an intruder in my own home, a stranger in my own life. I found myself back in the kitchen, staring out at the darkened pool. The water shimmered under the moonlight, its surface as smooth and impenetrable as Michael's gaze. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the images that haunted me, the towel, the scent, the words in the notebook. But they were always there, lurking in the shadows, whispering in my ear. I thought about David, his disbelief, his dismissal of my fears. How could he not see it? How could he not feel the danger that was lurking in our own home? Was I imagining things? Was I just a paranoid stepmother, overreacting to a teenage boy's fantasies? But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. The fear was too real, too visceral. I knew, deep down, that something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. I opened my eyes and looked out at the pool again. And then I saw it, a figure moving in the shadows. It was Michael. He was by the pool, his back to me. He was doing something, but I couldn't see what. My heart pounded in my chest. I watched him, my breath catching in my throat. He moved slowly, deliberately, his movements shrouded in the darkness. What was he doing? What was he hiding? I took a step back, my hand reaching for the light switch. Should I turn it on? Should I confront him? But a part of me was afraid of what I might see, afraid of what he might do. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the switch. And then he turned. He looked directly at me, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me, his face unreadable. A wave of fear washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He took a step towards me, and then another. He was moving slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking its prey. I could see the outline of his body in the darkness, the way the moonlight glinted off his skin. He was wet. He had been in the pool. He kept coming, his eyes never leaving mine. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I was trapped, cornered. I couldn't run. I couldn't scream. I could only watch as he approached, his face a mask of what? I couldn't tell. I could only feel the fear, the terror that gripped me, the certainty that something terrible was about to happen. He stopped just a few feet away from me, his shadow looming over me. He was so close I could feel his breath on my skin. It smelled of chlorine and something else. Something familiar, yet unsettling. The same scent I had detected on the towel, the same scent I had smelled in his room. He reached out his hand, his fingers brushing against my cheek. I flinched, expecting him to grab me, to hurt me. But he didn't. He just stood there, his hand resting lightly on my skin. And then he whispered something. I couldn't hear what he said. His voice was too low, too soft. But I could feel the words, vibrating through my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that sent a wave of fear through me. And then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, frozen, my hand still on my mouth, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, waiting, listening for any sound. But there was nothing. Just the silence of the night, the darkness, and the lingering scent of chlorine and something else. What did he say? What did he mean? And what was he going to do next? I didn't know. I only knew that I was afraid. More afraid than I had ever been in my life. And I knew with a chilling certainty that the nightmare was far from over.